The house sat quietly at the edge of a vineyard in Portugal's Algarve region, modest, sun-warmed, and forgettable. No gate, no cameras, just terracotta tiles weathered by sea air and a tangled veil of bougainvillea draped over the porch. It was the kind of place no one looked twice at, which made it perfect. Emily Sloan hadn't gone by that name in 6 months. Not since the night she walked out of her old life and vanished like smoke. She wasn't Anna Miller anymore either. That identity had served its purpose. These days in the village she was simply known as Sophia, the soft-spoken woman with the American accent and the quiet baby who never cried. She liked it that way. Each morning she rose before dawn, made tea, fed her son, watched the sunlight spill across the tiled floor like gold. There was peace in repetition, comfort in silence, but beneath the stillness a tension lived in her bones. A hum, a whisper. The awareness that peace this pure could never last. It started with a flicker. Emily was sorting laundry in the back room when her burner phone buzzed, a vibration so sharp and unexpected it made her spine straighten. The screen flashed a single message from Noah. Red Echo triggered. You need to check. Her heart dropped. Red Echo was their alert system, a silent alarm wired into the heartbeat of the failsafe Noah had built. The system was supposed to be invisible, impenetrable, dormant unless someone tried to touch the blackmail vault or trace the server location. Someone had tried. Emily locked the door and pulled down the blackout shades. She placed her son, now 7 months old, gently into his playpen, kissed the top of his downy soft head, and walked into the small converted storage room that now served as her command post. She booted up the secure laptop, Noah's code running like armor around every layer of the operating system. The terminal window opened with a hiss of encrypted data. A single anomaly, a ping from Zurich. Someone had tried to access a dormant account in Switzerland, a trust Emily hadn't touched in over 3 months. It wasn't enough to blow her cover, but it was enough to mean one thing. Someone was getting close. She didn't panic. She planned. Emily pulled out her leather-bound notebook and flipped to the last tab. Exodus Protocol. She had always known this day would come. A clean exit required preparation, and hers was already 90% in place. The only thing left was to make the choice, stay, and risk exposure. Or disappear, again. She looked back toward the playpen where her son gurgled softly, tiny hands gripping a rubber teether. His innocence split her heart open and steeled it at the same time. Emily opened a secure line to Noah. His voice came through instantly. I saw the ping. You okay? Not for long, she said quietly. We're leaving tonight. There was a pause. I'll trigger the blind cleanup sequence on this end, Noah said. You'll go dark again. No trail, no trace. You sure? Emily didn't hesitate. I'm sure. Because safety wasn't a location, it was a moving target. And the only way to survive was to keep moving. By sunset, she had packed only what mattered. Baby formula, identity documents, a photo of her parents, the ledger wallet, and a small vial of soil from her childhood home in Illinois. Everything else would be ash in less than 6 hours. The nanny, a warm older woman named Marta, showed up at her usual time. Emily met her at the front gate, holding the child close. I'm sorry, she said softly, handing over an envelope thick with cash. We have to go. Thank you for everything. Marta's eyes welled up, but she said nothing. She only nodded and pulled Emily into a hug. That night, as the moon rose over the hills and the breeze shifted inland from the coast, a black SUV slipped quietly down a gravel road, its headlights off, windows tinted. Inside, a woman with no name cradled a child with her whole heart and did not look back. It started with a whisper, an anonymous blog post on a niche financial site dissecting unusual offshore liquidation patterns. Then came the rumors. Boardroom murmurs, discreet inquiries. Someone, somewhere, noticed that Damien Hawthorne had been unusually quiet for too long. The world thought he had vanished, but Damien had never disappeared. He had simply gone underground. 6 months ago, the king of Hawthorne Enterprises lost everything. His wealth, his legacy, his wife, his child. His name was still intact, but barely. That name was the only currency he had left. He moved into a luxury high-rise in San Francisco. Not a penthouse this time, just a secure mid-level floor with blackout windows and rotating security personnel. The decor was minimalist: steel, leather, concrete, cold, efficient. No framed photos, no personal touches. Just strategy. Damien didn't mourn. He rebuilt. He called it Phase Zero. It began with a shell investment fund, Hawthorne Quantum Ventures. Quiet money, private capital, selective partners, no headlines, no IPOs. He started small. 2 biotech startups, a clean energy AI platform, and 1 cybersecurity firm with ties to ex-defense contractors. He didn't need to be flashy, he needed to be feared again. But behind the carefully managed business facade, Damien nurtured something far more personal. The hunt. He told no one, not even Marcus Thorne, his longtime lawyer, that he had hired a separate team. A private circle, people who didn't ask questions, people who didn't file invoices, people who only wanted results. At the center of it all was Elias Strum, a former Interpol tracker turned off-grid bounty consultant. Elias specialized in high-value targets with the ability to disappear. He spoke 6 languages, had 3 passports, and a record that no longer existed. They met in Zurich over black coffee and silence. "I want her found," Damien said, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside, photos, partial names, old flight manifests. Emily Sloan, Anna Miller, possibly Sophia Caldwell. Elias flipped through the file without expression. "You lost your wife," he said, "and you want to find her." Damien's jaw tensed. "She took my child." Elias looked up. His voice was cool, unreadable. "Is this about vengeance or retrieval?" Damien's fingers curled slowly around the coffee cup. "Both." Elias nodded once. "Then we begin." The next day, Elias boarded a flight to Zurich. He didn't start with airports or surveillance footage. Those were for amateurs. He started with the paper, the quiet, boring kind. Residual tax trails, outdated shipping invoices, supply chain manifests. Anything that might catch the faint echo of a woman trying to remain invisible. And somewhere, buried in an outdated export ledger from a small Swiss clinic, he found it. A pediatric supplies order addressed to an alias flagged in an old pharmaceutical database. The trail wasn't hot, but it wasn't cold either. It was just warm enough. Elias folded the printout neatly, tucked it into his coat, and looked out across the Zurich skyline. Snow was falling lightly, soft, silent. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But in his mind, the pieces had started to click. She had made a mistake, and now the game was in motion. Meanwhile, back in San Francisco, Damien stood alone in the center of his office, watching the skyline glow orange with dusk. A photo sat on his desk, unframed, creased at the corner. A still from the surveillance team he'd sent to Austria months ago. It was grainy, but clear enough. A woman holding a baby, wrapped in wool, looking over her shoulder, just once. He stared at it for a long time, then slid it into a drawer and shut it softly. She had run, but Damien Hawthorne was done losing. And this time, he wasn't chasing a woman, he was hunting a legacy. The hills above the Basque Coast smelled of salt and pine, wild rosemary and wood smoke. From the outside, the town looked like any other sleepy European village. One road in, one road out, old stone houses clinging to the cliffs like secrets. It was here, in the shadows of the Pyrenees, that Emily had chosen her next hiding place. She went by Isabelle Mercier now. French, widowed, quiet. Her hair was darker, cut blunt, styled modest, her posture more reserved. She had learned not just to disappear, but to shrink herself into the kind of woman no one looked twice at. Her baby, now 8 months old, was growing strong, alert, curious. He liked to grab at her hair when she carried him on her hip and babble into her ear like he was telling her stories only they could understand. Emily called him Leo. He was the only part of her life that still felt real. Noah checked in once every 4 days. Always via encrypted satellite signal, always using a new voice print. Their conversations were short and clinical. Status, movement, surveillance flags, safe zones. But this morning the tone had shifted. Elias Strum's digital ghost surfaced in Zurich, Noah said. He accessed archived pharmacy records, pediatric product imports tied to an old alias. Emily's stomach turned. "Do they know I'm here?" "Not yet, but it means he's close, too close." There was a long pause. Emily stared at the cracked tiles of her small kitchen floor, sunlight striping through the shutters. "I can't keep running forever, Noah." "No," he said, "but you can keep surviving." Elias arrived in Donostia 2 days later. He didn't check into a hotel. He rented a private flat through a friend in French intelligence. No paperwork, no digital trace. The apartment overlooked the old town square, where tourists snapped photos of stone cathedrals, and locals drank espresso at cafe tables draped in red and white checkers. From the second-story window, he watched everyone. The target wasn't obvious. No one here fit the description, at least not perfectly. But he had learned to look for other signs: isolation, pattern, dissonance. That afternoon he spotted her. Just a flash. A woman in a charcoal coat, moving quietly through a side street, pushing a stroller. Her face was turned downward, hair partially covered with a scarf. She was careful, controlled. But something about her gait, the stillness, the way she didn't linger too long at any one shop window, struck him. He didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, he followed her digital echo. Later that night, Elias parked himself in a darkened cafe with a laptop and a packet of local Wi-Fi interceptors. He began to scrape metadata off every active device in the neighborhood. Thousands of lines of code, MAC addresses, ping logs, handshake signals, and then one signature, buried deep, masked, altered but familiar. A custom encryption framework, Noah Sloan's. It was like seeing a ghost leave a fingerprint. Elias sat back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. He had her. Not physically, not yet, but intellectually she was now inside his circle. And once you were inside Elias Strom's circle, you didn't get out. That night, as rain tapped gently against the clay roof, Emily stood by the crib, watching Leo sleep. She felt it in her bones, something shifting. The quiet had changed texture. It no longer felt like peace. It felt like pressure. She stepped into the living room, slid open the drawer beneath the floorboards, and pulled out a slim metal case. Inside, burner phones, cash in 3 currencies, a backup ledger key, and 3 fresh IDs. Her hand hovered over the French passport marked Isabelle Mercier. She hesitated, then picked up a different one. Claire Dubois. She had 2 days, maybe less. The clock was ticking, and this time it wouldn't be just about escape, it would be about choice. The storm came in low and quiet, a hush that swept through the hills like a warning. By the time Noah arrived, the rain had turned to mist, and the road into the village was barely visible under fog. He drove without headlights, using only his instincts and an offline GPS chip burned into a secure tablet wedged between the seats. He hadn't seen his sister in over 3 months. When she opened the door, barefoot and pale, with Leo clinging sleepily to her hip, he forgot for a moment that they were fugitives. For a second, she looked like just a woman in her home, welcoming family. Then the look in her eyes reminded him, this wasn't home. It was a checkpoint on the run. Noah set down his duffel bag and ran diagnostics on the apartment within minutes. Scraped for listening devices, jammed outbound signals, swept for malware in the wireless printer, and even pulled apart the baby monitor. Nothing. Clean. But Emily already knew what he was going to say. He's close, she said quietly, watching Leo gnaw at a soft rubber toy in the corner. Noah nodded. Too close. And there's more. He pulled a thumb drive from the lining of his coat and slotted it into her encrypted laptop. Lines of code scrolled, green and fast. Last week, I found traces of an intrusion. Someone skimmed the dead man's switch server. They didn't break the encryption, but they got close, too close for it to be casual. Emily's eyes sharpened. Couldn't have been Elias. He wouldn't leave a trace. It wasn't him, Noah said. It was someone inside. A long pause settled between them. You're saying there's a leak? Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Emily sat down slowly, pressing her fingertips to her lips, then lowering them to her collarbone. Her breath grew shallow. They had planned for everything. Firewalls, blind wallets, rotating identities. But betrayal? That was harder to firewall. That night, after Leo finally fell asleep, Emily stood on the balcony with a blanket draped around her shoulders and a mug of lukewarm tea in her hands. Noah joined her, leaning silently against the railing. They watched the distant lights of a fishing boat blink in and out of the fog. When this started, she said, I thought it would be a few weeks, maybe months, just enough time to disappear and start again. You didn't expect to feel this attached to him, Noah said softly. Emily looked down at the baby monitor glowing on the nearby table. No, she whispered. I didn't expect him to become my reason for everything. Back inside, tucked inside the lining of Leo's diaper bag, Emily kept something she hadn't touched in weeks. A sealed envelope labeled, If I don't come back. It wasn't just a note. It was an instruction, a plan, a legacy. Inside was everything Noah would need if something ever happened to her. Every password, every ledger key, every line of code that protected her son's future. She sat on the bed, opened the envelope, updated the access instructions, and resealed it. She wasn't planning to die, But she also wasn't naive enough to believe planning to live was enough. At 3:11 a.m., Leo stirred. Emily rocked him slowly in her arms, singing something soft and half-forgotten. Her mind wasn't on the melody. It was on the window, the locks, the cameras, and on the feeling she couldn't shake, that Elias wasn't hunting her anymore. He was waiting. The Basque Coast was unpredictable in April. One day the skies were cerulean and wide open, the next they pressed down like a lid. On this morning, they were gray and watching. Elias liked it better that way. He stood at the edge of the town square, coffee in one hand, a folded map in the other. To anyone passing, he was just another tourist, middle-aged, quiet, blending into the patchwork of strangers that came and went through this little place by the sea. But Elias didn't come and go. He watched, he waited, and now he was moving in. It had taken only 4 days to confirm her. Not with cameras or facial recognition. That would have been too obvious, too risky. Instead, it was a scent trail built from anomalies, a pharmacy order that didn't match the local clinic's patient records, a Wi-Fi signal from a device using Sloan-level encryption, a pattern of cash purchases too clean to be accidental. But the final piece came from a baker's wife. She mentioned a woman, elegant, quiet, always with her baby, always paying in crisp 50-euro notes, always looking over her shoulder just a little too often. She has sadness in her posture, the woman said. Elias nodded politely and walked away, his mind already turning. Back in his rented flat, Elias rolled out a map of the region and marked a tight radius around 3 locations: the pharmacy, the post office, and a small green grocer on Calle del Mar. She wasn't moving much. She had a rhythm. That made her vulnerable. He didn't need to rush. He needed to time it right. She was more than a target now. She was a variable, intelligent, cautious, emotionally driven. You didn't trap someone like Emily Sloan with brute force. You guided her. You made her walk into the cage herself. That evening he walked the same road she had walked that morning. Past the grocer, past the bakery, down a narrow stone path that curved behind the church and led to the bluff. He saw her there, at a distance, watching the water with Leo in her arms. She didn't see him, but he didn't need her to. Not yet. Back at the apartment, Emily felt it. Not danger, not noise, but pressure. Something in the air had shifted. She checked the baby monitor 3 times before lying down, locked all 3 bolts on the front door, turned off every electronic in the apartment except the dedicated emergency channel line Noah had hardwired into the floor. She lay awake for hours, her mind drifting between memory and instinct. Something was close, too close. 2 blocks away, Elias opened a fresh file on his laptop. Inside, scanned documents, passports, altered birth records, a full workup on Noah Sloan's digital network, and a photo, grainy, from Austria, of Emily standing in profile, her hand on her belly, her face turned slightly away from the camera. This was his moment. He wouldn't miss it. The following morning, the fog lifted and the wind changed direction. Emily stood on the balcony, Leo tucked against her chest, eyes scanning the horizon. For a moment she felt calm. Then, in the apartment below, a car engine started. And something about the sound, it didn't belong. It wasn't from here. It was following her rhythm. Emily turned toward the nursery, pulled Leo's go-bag from beneath the crib, and whispered just loud enough for herself to hear. "It's time." The nursery was quiet. Too quiet. Emily stood still in the center of the room. Leo pressed against her chest, her breath slow and controlled. Her eyes scanned the corners, the ceiling, the shadows. Something was wrong. She moved to the bookshelf, a small white unit shaped like a tree, and ran her fingers along the plush toys, the storybooks, the wooden elephant Noah had carved. That's when she saw it. A button-eyed teddy bear that wasn't hers. She hadn't bought this. She hadn't packed it. She hadn't placed it in Leo's crib. Emily reached down, picked it up with gloved fingers, and pressed gently along the seam. There, a hard edge under the fabric. A pinhole camera, embedded in the eye. Her body didn't flinch. Her pulse didn't spike. She was past adrenaline. She was inside the war room now. Emily walked to the closet, opened a box labeled donations, and tucked the bear deep inside. She didn't smash it. She didn't scream. She adapted. By nightfall, her plan was in motion. The exit path was clear. The alley behind the bakery, through a connected courtyard, past the florist's rear garden gate. She'd stashed a fresh ID, a burner phone, and Leo's spoor. She wrapped Leo in his soft blanket, kissed his forehead, and whispered, Hold on, baby, just a little longer. Then she slipped out the back window and vanished into the dark. But Elias was waiting. He didn't follow her. He stepped into the apartment as soon as she left. No alarms triggered, no digital trail lit. He moved through the space slowly, like a priest walking through a sacred site desecrated by truth. Everything was calculated. The decor, the simplicity, the silence. All of it built to hide a woman who never wanted to be seen again. He walked into the nursery, saw the empty crib. The bear was gone. His jaw tensed slightly. She'd found it. Good. He expected her to. Emily didn't run far. She doubled back. From the alley rooftop across the street, she watched him through a cracked shutter. Not Damien's usual thugs. Not local law. He was calm, measured, professional, too professional. She didn't recognize him, but something in her told her she should. The next morning, she waited. Leo was tucked safely with a trusted neighbor, an elderly woman who thought Emily was just a French widow with a colicky son and sad eyes. Emily returned to the apartment alone. He was already there, sitting in her kitchen, sipping tea like he owned the air between the walls. "You're not very good at disappearing," Elias said softly. Emily closed the door behind her without a word. "Or maybe," he continued, "you wanted to be found." "I never leave crumbs," she replied coldly. Elias nodded. "Except one." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small USB drive on the table. Emily didn't look at it. She looked at him. "You work for him?" "I was hired by him," Elias said. "That's not the same thing." The silence was sharp. Emily walked to the table, sat across from him. "So what now?" she asked. Elias leaned forward slightly. "That depends on you." For the next 20 minutes there were no threats, no raised voices, no false promises. Just two professionals dissecting each other in layers. He asked questions she didn't answer. She answered questions he didn't ask. And somewhere in the middle of the silence, something shifted. Elias wasn't chasing her for money. He wasn't after Leo. He wasn't even entirely sure he still worked for Damien. "I know what he did to you," Elias finally said. "And I know what he's capable of." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm the threat," she said. "No," Elias replied. "I think you're the weapon." Outside, the street was silent again. But inside that small kitchen, something unexpected had occurred. Not surrender, not betrayal, but a potential alliance. And Emily Sloan, who had trusted no one but her brother for nearly a year, said something she hadn't said to another soul since the day she disappeared. "Help me." They sat in silence after she said it. "Help me." The words lingered in the kitchen like smoke, sharp and disorienting. Elias didn't respond right away. He watched her the way a soldier watches a horizon, waiting to see if the sky would break. Finally, he spoke. "On one condition." Emily lifted an eyebrow. "You don't lie to me again." Her expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders loosened. That kind of honesty, raw, demanding, without ceremony, was something she understood. "I won't," she said. "Then we need to talk," Elias said. "About Damien, about the boy, and about the endgame." Over the next 2 hours, a new plan was born. Not a retreat, an execution. Elias laid out what he knew. Damien was rebuilding, slowly, quietly. A new venture fund, capital from dark corners, and a fresh circle of shell corporations starting to surface under fake names. The man wasn't just coming back, he was plotting something bigger. Emily didn't flinch. "I want him to know," she said, "that I'm still 2 steps ahead, that no matter how many empires he builds, I can take them apart with a keyboard and a whisper." Elias stared at her, then asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want from him, Emily? Revenge?" She shook her head. "No, I already won that." "Then what?" "I want him to disappear. Permanently. No power, no reach, no legacy, and I want it to be my choice." The next day, Elias wired in Noah from a secure, air-gapped line. Emily explained everything, what she needed, what she suspected, and who Elias really was. Noah didn't trust easily, but after a long silence he said, "I'll help, but if he crosses you." "I won't," Elias said, cutting in. "Not because I believe in angels, but because I've seen devils, and Damien Hawthorne is the worst kind." The plan was precise. Step 1, kill Emily, not literally, but publicly. Elias would leak a report, subtly, strategically, through a low-credibility online tabloid about a woman and infant killed in a tragic fire on the Basque coast. The victim's name, Isabelle Mercier. The photo planted in the article would be doctored, close enough to resemble Emily, but distorted by smoke and blur. A body would be found. Dental records would match. Noah made sure of that. To the world, Emily Sloan had perished. So had her child. Step 2. Bait Damien. Elias would deliver a tip, via a backdoor contact within Damien's own surveillance ring, that confirmed Emily had been tracked, nearly captured, but ultimately lost to the flames. The grief wouldn't last, not for Damien, but the illusion of closure would make him reckless. He'd lower his guard. And that was when the real play would begin. Step 3. The last heist. Damien's newest fund, Hawthorne Quantum Ventures, was being quietly fed by shadow capital, crypto laundered through Hong Kong and Liechtenstein. Emily had mapped the structure already. She didn't need access. She needed permission. And now, with Elias on her side, she had an entry point through one of the shell companies Damien trusted most, an identity he'd buried, but which Elias still had control over from an old case. They would drain the accounts, not for the money, but for the message. You never see the final cut coming until you've already bled. At 3:17 a.m., Emily stood over Leo's crib, watching him breathe. Outside, Elias waited in a stolen sedan, the engine running low. Noah was already in motion from Geneva, sending signals, cloaking their path, watching every trace of their new digital selves unfold. Emily placed one final item in the go-bag, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, 4 words, "This is not over." She folded it, placed it in the hollowed-out teddy bear. Elias would leave in Damien's hotel room the following week, not because he needed a warning, but because he needed to remember. He had started the war, but she would finish it. The photo reached Damien on a Sunday morning. It was slipped under the door of his penthouse suite at the Mandarin Oriental in Bangkok, where he'd flown in for a quiet investor meeting with a group of Southeast Asian capital backers. He had just finished a workout, body slick with sweat, confidence coiled tight across his jaw like armor. He noticed the envelope before the knock. There was no return address, no branding, just his name, handwritten in sharp, even strokes across the front, D. Hawthorne. Inside was a printout, a grainy news article in Spanish. Below the headline, "Tragic Fire Claims Mother and Infant in Basque Coast Cottage Blaze," was a blurred photograph. He froze. The baby, the curve of the woman's jaw, the scarf. It could have been anyone. It was her. His chest hollowed, breath caught between disbelief and calculation. For the first time in over a year, he wasn't sure how to react. No rage, just silence. Marcus Thorne called an hour later, voice tight and uncertain. "Is it true?" Damien didn't answer. "I just got pinged by someone from your Zurich circle. They saw it too. There's chatter all over the altboards. Sloan, dead, child too." Still, Damien said nothing. He poured a drink. Didn't sip it, just stared at it. "You should be relieved," Marcus said. "This means it's over." But it didn't feel over. It felt like it had just begun. By Tuesday, the cracks started showing. His Cayman proxy, an AI-driven crypto vault, began issuing micro-anomalies, transfers he hadn't initiated, routes he didn't recognize. By Wednesday, his Liechtenstein firm flagged an internal audit, strange movements, high-frequency withdrawals just beneath reporting thresholds. By Thursday, Morgan Stanley emailed an alert, suspicious pattern recognition, account flagged for review. It was déjà vu, but worse, because this time he had believed he was safe. This time, he had built the fortress himself. And this time, there was no way Emily Sloan could have done it. She was dead, wasn't she? He flew to Geneva on Friday, stormed into the private banking office like a ghost in a hurricane. His contact there, an older Swiss man named Keller, looked nervous. "There's a situation," Keller said carefully. Damien slammed a folder on the table. "You think? We're tracking it, but whoever's doing this is surgical." That word again, surgical. Precise, relentless. He knew it. He hated that he knew it. "Pull the logs, pull the DNS, pull the keys. I want names," Damien growled. But when Keller handed over the preliminary access audit, there was no list of hackers, no IP addresses, just one line, authorized entry by controlling partner. He stared. "What controlling partner?" Keller swallowed. "A shell firm tied to your secondary trust, activated via dormant clause. You signed it 2 years ago." Damien's vision blurred. No, not her, not again. Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe in Lisbon, Emily scrolled the same alerts on her secure tablet, sipping tea beside Leo's stroller. Noah had just texted a one-line update. He's unraveling. Elias, now operating from a hotel in Zurich, forwarded video clips from Damien's building. Security cam footage showing him pacing like a caged animal, shouting at his phone, slamming doors. Emily didn't smile, but she did close the tablet with a certain calm. By Sunday, the news broke. A cascade of quiet collapses, crypto losses, mismanaged funds, shuttered investment arms. Online forums screamed, Hawthorne Quantum implodes overnight. Another heist or internal sabotage? Board members pulled out, clients withdrew, regulators circled. Marcus left a voicemail. Damien never returned. It said, simply, we're done. And Damien, once the master of the game, stood in the center of his glass empire as the walls fell inward. No flames, no noise, just the cold, clinical silence of being beaten at a game he thought he invented. The final email arrived that night, encrypted, untraceable. A screenshot of a dormant trust account. New name on file, Leo Sloan. Controlling parent, Emily Sloan. Underneath, 4 words in plain text, this is your legacy. 2 years later, the village of Ballater stirred awake beneath a silver sky. Set against the green swell of the Scottish Highlands, it was the kind of place where time moved quietly, marked by the chiming of the bakery bell, the clip of bicycle tires on stone, and the low hum of sheep grazing along the fence lines. At the edge of the village, nestled behind a narrow gate overgrown with ivy, stood a small stone cottage with blue shutters and flower boxes in the windows. Inside, a woman with dark hair tied loosely at her nape sat at a wooden table, writing in a soft leather journal. She wore no makeup. Her face had lines it hadn't had before. But it was her face, entirely her own. Emily Sloan didn't exist on any government record. Her name now was Claire Reed. She taught early literature at the village school and worked part-time cataloging historical records at the small library downtown. She spoke little of her past. She didn't need to. Because everything she had fought for, everything she had burned, lived in the next room, laughing. Leo, now a toddler with a wild mess of curls and his uncle's mischievous grin, was crouched on the living room rug, building towers from worn wooden blocks. He knocked one over, giggled, then looked around as if checking whether anyone had seen. Emily peeked her head in. I saw that, she said with a mock gasp. He squealed and ran toward her, arms outstretched. She caught him mid-stride, pressing a kiss to his cheek. He smelled like milk and soap and fresh air. He smelled like freedom. Noah lived just 15 minutes away, in a house with more computers than furniture. He visited often, pretending he didn't spoil Leo, but the toddler's growing collection of toy drones said otherwise. Elias hadn't been seen since Lisbon, but every few months a postcard would arrive. No return address, just a location: Marrakesh, Tokyo, Anchorage. Underneath, a message: still watching, still quiet. Emily never replied. She didn't have to. She had changed countries, changed faces, changed names, but what hadn't changed was her core. She no longer felt hunted. She no longer felt afraid. She was not a ghost. She was a mother. Every 72 hours she still logged into the encrypted server, just once, just enough to reset the dead man's switch. But she didn't read the files anymore. She didn't need leverage. She had won, not by destroying Damien, but by becoming untouchable, by creating a life where he didn't exist, not in her home, not in her son's world, not in her dreams. One morning, as the first light painted the hills gold, Emily stood barefoot in the dewy grass behind the cottage, holding Leo on her hip. He pointed toward the horizon and said, "Sun." She nodded. "Yes, baby, that's the sun." He looked at her, puzzled. "It wake you up?" She smiled gently, kissed the top of his head. "No, sweetheart, you woke me up." Back inside, she took the journal from the table and wrote 3 final lines. I was never meant to survive quietly. I was meant to rise. And now, we live. She closed the book, set it on the windowsill, and turned toward her future. So, if this story moved you, even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments, what part of Nathan's story hit closest to home for you? Who would you call, or what would you change if you realized today was your turning point? Because maybe, just maybe, the real gift is knowing it's never too late to start again. Thank you for being here. And remember, healing starts with a single, honest step. Let's take it together. Maybe you're sitting there now, quiet, still, after witnessing Emily Sloan's journey unfold. She wasn't perfect, but she was strong enough to stand up after betrayal, smart enough to turn pain into power, and brave enough to choose peace over vengeance. We watched her be hunted, cornered, cast aside. But she never broke. She didn't wait to be saved. She became her own rescue. And in today's world, where women are often expected to smile through their pain, to shrink, to endure, Emily chose silence first and then strategy. She didn't scream, she outmaneuvered. This isn't just a story of survival or revenge, it's a reminder. You don't have to be perfect to deserve peace. You can lose everything and still begin again, on your own terms. Emily reminds us that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet decision made at 3 a.m. to protect your child, to walk away, to start over, even if no one sees you do it. If you've ever been hurt, loved the wrong person, given everything and received silence in return, let this story tell you what you may have forgotten. You can lose your name in someone else's story and still write the first line of your own. You can be erased from a bank account, a mansion, a photo album, and still build a life more powerful than any of it. Emily didn't just survive, she rewrote the ending. And you can too. Maybe you're not running from a billionaire. Maybe you're just trying to find the strength to leave a toxic job, a bad marriage, or an old version of yourself behind. That still counts. That still matters. Truly living doesn't mean having it all. It means choosing you, every day, even when it's hard, even when no one claps. So if you're watching this right now, maybe this is your sign. A quiet nod from the universe. A soft whisper saying, you're not alone. A hand on your heart saying, you're allowed to begin again. Thank you for walking this story with us. Thank you for believing in the power of fiction to speak truth. And if this ending touched you, leave a comment. Tell us, what chapter of your life are you in? What story are you ready to write next? Because maybe, just maybe, your story will be the light someone else needs to find their way out of the dark. And always remember, healing doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with permission. Permission to start over, to live, to rise,